Maxwell Westbrook was a man of few words, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. Every penny he earned was the result of hard work, sharp insight, and relentless ambition. His name was respected in the world of business, his decisions always precise and well-calculated. People admired him, some even feared him, but none of that truly mattered to Maxwell. The one thing he cherished more than anything else was his son, Lucas. Lucas had always been Maxwell's pride and joy from the day he was born. Maxwell invested all his dreams into Lucas, ensuring that he received the finest education, the best mentors, and endless opportunities. He didn't build his empire just for himself, but for Lucas, hoping that one day his son would inherit everything and continue the family legacy. Lucas was the center of Maxwell's world, but over time, things began to change. Maxwell watched with growing concern as Lucas became more and more distant. The love and care Maxwell had poured into him were met with indifference. The young man who had once been humble and grateful was now arrogant, entitled, and uninterested in the values of loyalty, integrity, and hard work. He seemed to take his father's wealth and success for granted. Maxwell could hardly recognize the person Lucas had become, and it troubled him deeply. One evening, as Maxwell sat alone in his office, staring out the window, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Had he failed as a father? Perhaps all the wealth and power he had amassed had corrupted his son? This thought grew stronger with each passing day until Maxwell decided he needed to know the truth. He resolved to test Lucas, not with words but through actions. After much contemplation, Maxwell decided to disappear. He would leave behind everything: his mansion, his fortune, and his name. Maxwell would live as an ordinary man, blending in with the crowd, to see if Lucas would care enough to find him. It was a drastic step, but Maxwell felt there was no other way to get the answers he needed. The next morning, Maxwell packed a small bag with only the essentials, a little cash, and a few personal items. As he left his mansion, he paused to look back, the weight of what he was about to do settling in. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity. He knew this was something he had to do. For weeks, Maxwell wandered the streets, far removed from the world of luxury he had once known. His once pristine suits grew worn, his polished shoes became scuffed, and he slept in shelters, eating whatever he could afford. He faded into obscurity, no longer Maxwell Westbrook, the billionaire businessman, but just another face in the crowd. Meanwhile, Lucas continued his life of luxury, driving expensive cars and dining in the finest restaurants. Maxwell would sometimes catch glimpses of him through windows or hear whispers of his extravagant lifestyle. It was clear that Lucas had not missed the wealth his father had provided. But the question remained, did he miss his father? One day, Maxwell found himself standing across from an upscale restaurant where Lucas often dined with business associates. He watched from the other side of the street as his son entered the restaurant, laughing with his colleagues. The sight made Maxwell's heart ache, but he stayed hidden, not yet ready to confront him. Eventually, Maxwell worked up the courage to enter the restaurant himself. The elegant decor, crisp table linens, and quiet conversations reminded him of a life he had left behind. At the hostess stand, he asked for a seat. The hostess looked him up and down, clearly disapproving of his disheveled appearance. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have seating available for someone like you," she said coldly. Maxwell's stomach twisted in discomfort, but he swallowed his pride. "Please," he pleaded, "it's been a long day." But the hostess remained unmoved, her eyes cold and unfeeling. As Maxwell turned to leave, he saw Lucas sitting at a table with his colleagues, laughing and enjoying his meal. The sight cut Maxwell deeply. Maxwell took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Lucas," he called softly. Lucas turned around, his expression first confused, then cold. "Do I know you?" he asked sharply, not recognizing the ragged man standing before him. Maxwell's heart sank. He steadied himself before replying, "It's me, your father." Lucas scanned his father's worn face, his eyes briefly softening before he quickly regained his composure. "I don't have time for this," he said coldly. "Leave." Maxwell turned away, his chest heavy with disappointment. He left the restaurant, broken by the cold indifference of his own son. In the days that followed, Maxwell drifted through life in a daze. His son had not only failed the test, but he had also failed as a person. The realization struck Maxwell deeply. He had tried everything for Lucas, but his son's coldness and indifference were beyond what he could bear. Maxwell knew that he had to take action. He contacted his lawyer, Victor Hayes, instructing him to drastically reduce Lucas's inheritance. Leave him just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive, Maxwell told him firmly. Victor hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. I've trusted you for years, Maxwell, but this is unprecedented. Maxwell also hired a private investigator, Amelia Clark, to uncover Lucas's activities. What she found was devastating. Lucas had been involved in shady business deals, manipulated clients, and betrayed loyal colleagues. The son Maxwell had raised to be a man of integrity had turned into someone selfish and unethical. Maxwell was heartbroken. He knew he had to confront his son one final time. He summoned Lucas to the mansion, hoping that this confrontation would bring some kind of resolution. When Lucas arrived, his usual swagger was gone, replaced by an uneasy look. Maxwell motioned for him to sit at the dining table. "You failed me," Maxwell began, his voice steady but filled with pain. "I gave you everything, and you threw it all away." Lucas responded defensively, his tone rising. "I built my success. I worked hard." Maxwell shook his head. "No, you were handed everything, and you betrayed not just me, but the values I taught you." Maxwell slid a folder across the table. Inside were legal documents that severed Lucas from the family fortune. Lucas's face turned pale as he read the papers. "You can't do this," he shouted, slamming the folder down. Maxwell's voice cracked as he replied, "I already have. This is the last lesson I'll ever teach you. Build your own life from here." Enraged, Lucas stormed out of the mansion, swearing he would never return. Maxwell watched him leave, a mixture of sadness and resolve settling in his chest. The decision had been made. Lucas would have to face the consequences of his actions alone. In the months that followed, Lucas's life quickly unraveled. His business ventures failed, his friends abandoned him, and he was left alone, facing the full brunt of his choices. One rainy night, Lucas stood outside the gates of the mansion, drenched and filled with regret. The wealth, the success, the luxury, it all seemed meaningless now. What he missed most was his father's love and guidance. It was too late for Lucas to turn back, but he realized something vital. True wealth wasn't in the things he had, money, cars, or status, but in family, integrity, and love. As he walked away from the mansion, drenched in the rain, he resolved to change. The road ahead would be hard, but it was one he had to walk alone. As Lucas walked away from the mansion that night, drenched and cold, he reflected on everything he had lost. The lavish lifestyle, the luxury cars, the expensive dinners, all of it now felt empty. He realized the true value of life lay not in material wealth, but in the love and guidance of his father, which he had taken for granted for so long. Over the following months, Lucas made drastic changes in his life. He started by cutting ties with the people who had led him down the wrong path, the ones who had encouraged his greed and selfishness. He started to rebuild his reputation, this time from the ground up, knowing it would be a long and difficult journey. At the same time, Maxwell returned to his business, rebuilding the empire he had once created. But something had changed within him. He no longer cared about the wealth or the power. What mattered most to him now was family and integrity. He focused on using his resources to help others, creating opportunities for people who had been forgotten or overlooked by society. One day, after months of hard work, Lucas found himself outside the gates of the mansion again. This time, he wasn't filled with arrogance or entitlement. He stood there, humbled, knowing that the journey he had taken was only the beginning of the man he was trying to become. Maxwell saw him from a distance, standing outside with his head slightly bowed. For a moment, he hesitated. Would his son really have changed? Would he come back, not seeking wealth or status, but simply for a chance to make amends? Maxwell's heart weighed heavy with doubt, but he also felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Finally, Maxwell stood up and walked toward the gates. As he approached, he saw the sincerity in Lucas's eyes, a far cry from the coldness and arrogance he had seen before. "Lucas," Maxwell said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, I'm glad you're here. Lucas looked up, his voice soft. I've come to make things right, he said quietly. There was a long silence as the two men stood facing each other, neither knowing quite what to say. Finally, Maxwell opened his arms. Let's start over, he said. It's not too late. Lucas stepped forward, a tear falling down his cheek. Thank you, Dad, he whispered. Maxwell smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. This was a new beginning for both of them.